Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. Story number 1. I had an asthma attack and was taken to the hospital, where I was placed on a life support machine or respirator in intensive care for about 5 days. I was aware of 4 states of consciousness: awake, dreaming, hallucinating, and being out of body in another realm. I was listening to 2 doctors discuss the opening up of the thoracic area when I realized they were talking about me. Geez, they think I'm unconscious and are going to operate on me while I'm wide awake, I thought. When I regained consciousness, I told the nurse about it, and she told me that the conversation had taken place, but in a different room than the one I was in, and the doctors were discussing someone else. I was in a hospital bed in a clinical room that wasn't solid. My yoga teacher's wife, Baha, stood to my left, having died 3 years before of breast cancer. Baha was animatedly conversing with a blue light being. He was tall and shaped like a man, but he lacked features. A neon turquoise blue light outlined his shape, and lights moved inside it like sunlight on water. Baha and the light being were both laughing heartily. I was aware that my lungs were not moving, and I tried to move my chest up and down by breathing. Nothing happened. "Stop interfering. Let the machine breathe you. All you have to do is be here," Baha said. I decided to give it a shot and stopped trying to breathe. I realized that I was still alive, even if I didn't breathe. I was watching my life play out in my mind like a video, left to right. I saw myself laughing when I was 7 and wearing a brown and white striped dress made by my grandmother. I saw myself in a conversation with my classmates saying things like, "Don't be stupid. When you're dead, you're dead," and other things that I can't recall right now. I went back to when I was a fetus, and I was rocking myself to a sound in the shape of a triangle. Not like a pyramid, but with a long base, a short upright on the left side, and a curved top line. Perhaps my mother's breathing. I just discovered my tongue and was rubbing it against the roof of my mouth. The sensation was exquisite. I discovered that I could click my tongue, which I now refer to as the sucking motion, and was clicking my tongue to the shape of the sound as I rocked myself. I was in a trance. I went to a place of knowledge where I knew everything. It was here that I realized there was no such thing as time or space. It was here that I realized I'd written all of my melodramas, which made me laugh. I call that my cosmic giggle. I entered a flow of oneness that I believe is God. I called it the isness. It is a state of bliss in which I am all there is. It has no form. It's like waking up from a nightmare and finding yourself safe at home. Life on earth is a dream, and this bliss is the reality that you wake up safe and sound from. I was back in the room with Baha when she said, "It's time for you to go back now." I stated that I did not want to return. I had a vision of my daughter crying over my grave. I could feel what my daughter was feeling and thought, "She's not ready for me to leave her yet. I should go back." I was back in my body as soon as I had that thought. I was watching the video of my life again when it suddenly vanished, as if the video was one of those little tape measures that has a button on top to recoil the tape into its plastic housing, and someone had pressed the button. Hey, I was watching that, I thought to myself. A tea lady woke me up. I requested some water. My leg had pins and needles, and I wanted to put my foot on the floor, but every time I moved my leg, a woman's voice would shout, "Get back in bed." I had no idea where I was, why I was there, or even who I was. I assumed I was in a concentration camp, being held against my will. I didn't recognize my daughter when she came to visit and had to ask who she was. I wanted to go home, even though I didn't know where it was. I had a stroke the night I got home and lost my memory, ability to speak, and balance, so for a while I had to come downstairs on my bottom, holding onto the railings and having someone to hold on to when I walked. I couldn't bend over without collapsing. I was terrified of being alone. This went on for about 6 weeks, and my husband had to find someone to sit with me if he wanted to go out. I felt like a child. As I relearned how to speak and walk, my speech resembled that of a Swedish or German woman. I was very emotional and sensitive, easily bursting into tears and terrified. Then came a long period of bliss in which I was aware of the oneness of everything. I would amuse myself while hanging out the laundry, knowing that everything is God. Wild birds would perch on my head as I sat in the garden, and I hand-fed a wild pigeon. I had no fear at the time. A black bird flew out of the hedge near my ankle and soared into the air one day. I felt as if I were flying with her for a while and was ecstatic. I was completely psychic, and all I had to do was think of someone or something, and they would appear at my door. I had a deep love for everyone I came into contact with, and I would describe that state now as living completely in the moment, in the now or in the flow. Apparently, my eyes were all lit up at the time. I lost one of my friends who thought I was possessed because I had a complete personality transplant. It was difficult for me to explain what had happened to me because there are no words to describe it. I can only approximately describe it. I recognized people even though I couldn't remember my past. I had forgotten how to drive until I sat in the car. I had forgotten the names of my brothers. A lot of memories were forever lost to me. My speech and balance returned to normal after about 6 months. For many years, I would wake up around 2 a.m. and the blue being, Michael, would teach me spiritual things until about 5 a.m. Although I can still feel him around me, his presence in my life isn't as strong as it once was. This was my choice because I felt I was becoming too reliant on him to guide me. I trained as a hypnotherapist and holistic masseuse so that I could assist people in healing themselves. I consider myself to be a healer. I believe my purpose here is to help people become unafraid of the dying process and to teach them that there is life after death. I later trained as an interfaith minister and spiritual counselor so that I could work in hospitals and hospices. My husband and I divorced soon after the incident. There is now no evidence that I ever had a stroke. I believe I've seen the last of my asthma attacks. There could be others that I'm forgetting right now. Story number 2. I believe I had a genuine enlightenment experience that lasted many years and included 5 near-death experiences, culminating in a fundamental mental change in self-awareness and spatial awareness, and irreversible insight. The most fundamental shift occurred in early 2001. I'd gone through 7 years of anxiety and depression, constantly questioning everything. A 7-year relationship, with my partner becoming pregnant at the end, had ended badly in 1998, leaving me deeply depressed and unable to find work, and I was perplexed as to why everything seemed to be happening to me at once, seemingly out of control. I had to sell my flat, which took a long time, and return to my parents' house. Panic attacks, constant anxiety, isolation, loss of self-control in terms of anger or frustration, and exhaustion were all common symptoms. I finally sought medical help for clinical depression after exhaustion and isolation led to a mental breakdown after numerous failed attempts to find work in the industry I was used to, cutting-edge virtual reality art and design. I became aware of phenomena such as synchronicity in terms of things happening in my life that were echoed in popular culture, new films, music, TV, etc. A sense of being at a cultural zeitgeist and frequently feeling I'd caused it. As I listened to and interpreted every street comment as something about me and my situation, I became extremely paranoid. After a while, I realized that people were talking about me and not always to me about their perceptions of my mental state. I had also become so isolated and detached that whenever I went out into public life, as it were, I was extremely self-conscious and neurotic, frequently breaking down and confiding in or being suspicious of complete strangers. These feelings culminated when I sat in my chair crying, rain beating against the window, and then there was a complete shift in perspective, a lifting of a veil from reality, if you will. It's become known as my focus pull moment. When a camera pulls out and zooms in at the same time, usually to capture a character's reaction shot, the background and foreground change in terms of depth of field, while the face remains large in frame. For example, Steven Spielberg frequently used this in the 1980s, Poltergeist, E.T., Close Encounters, etc. I felt my entire self as a complete entity floating in space in my mind, and I became very aware of simple things like being at the top of the body rather than elsewhere and being the center of self. Following this, I felt very unstable and spaced out, with the spatial awareness feeling like I was standing on a big ball in infinite space, frequently throwing me off balance. I became aware of a strong sense of all things universal interconnectedness. Friends and others began to notice and comment, mostly indirectly, on my persona being lit up, illuminated, and hollowed. These side effects had terrified me because I was unfamiliar with them and felt uneasy with what appeared to be an added responsibility for what I didn't know. I tried to deny and bury my feelings as well as not acknowledge my after effects in order to maintain my act. But it seemed that other people's reactions to me were making me more paranoid and self-conscious. My final near-death experience occurred when I had become so isolated that I couldn't think of any other way to re-enter the world of regular work. All of my offers and approaches had been turned down, and was in a mental health unit. One day, I was doing some gardening and feeling as if I were a dead weight with no energy left, when a small black bird hopped up beside me. I looked it in the eyes, and it returned my gaze. To be honest, it terrified me because it felt like I was looking in the mirror. "That blackbird is very tame," one of the attendants commented. I assumed she was referring to me, even though I am male. My intuition and general outward persona gives me some female traits. At that point, I felt very dark inside, unable to resolve inner conflict about my purpose, my experiences, and what other people's reactions to them all meant. I told my psychiatric nurse about the black bird in the garden. I told him that I thought the bird was telling me to live because it was pecking out my eyes or something. Since then, I've noticed a swarm of robins where I walk, sometimes as many as 5. I associate the robin with Batman and Robin, and seeing one is always a good omen and a good day. It reminds me of who I am and that I have reasons to live and things to do for others. These things may appear irrational, but I believe that the closer you get to your true nature, the more in tune you become with natural events. After all, everything originates and returns to nature. Or Tao, as I've come to refer to it. The state of being infinite, empty, and nameless. My life focus has completely shifted, and I'm now working as a mentor and life coach, assisting others in helping themselves. My interests are now much more focused on people than computers or design. Through spiritual experience, I have visions of global unity, and I'm working on becoming, or rather continuing to be, a catalyst for global spiritual change, human understanding.